So, what's the best vlogging camera for you? Well, in this video, I've got you covered. We're gonna look at different budget levels and skill levels from beginner all the way to enthusiast and pro. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to see all of our upcoming videos. But most importantly, make sure to check out the links down below in the description for the best possible pricing on your camera gear. With that being said, let's get into the video. So, the first camera on the list is the G7X Mark II and its slightly better looking brother, the Mark III. Both are great beginner cameras for someone who wants to shoot high quality video with a slight boost in technology in the Mark III. Both cameras have a 20 megapixel 1-inch sensor, which is going to give you sharp and highly detailed video, with fantastic colors right out of the camera. Canon is known for having colors that look good without any editing, especially for faces. Now, the processor in the G7X Mark II is a little bit old, but thankfully, the autofocus is still very fast and reliable. And the autofocus in the Mark III is even better with a few firmware updates. But really, there's three major factors that will help you figure out if this camera is right for you. So first of all, it has a built-in lens, which means you cannot change lenses on this camera. But that permanent fixed lens is actually quite good. It's great at both wide and close-up shots, with a focal length from 24 to 100 millimeters. And this lens is great at nighttime and low light conditions with a variable aperture between f1.8 and 2.8. Personally, I think you're gonna save a ton of money by not having to buy more lenses. And the second reason is the video frame rates and the color signs. This camera does full HD at both 24 and 30 frames per second for vlogging, and it also has 60 frames per second for 2x slow motion. This comes in really handy if you want to do slow motion montage sequences or just dramatic slow motion for your vlogs. But best of all, it actually has a built-in time-lapse feature, which looks super cool in vlogs. However, this camera does not do 4K and it does not do super slow motion like 120 frames per second. For that, I actually recommend the big brother, the G7X Mark III, because that camera with the newer processor not only has faster autofocus, but it also has 4K and 120 frames per second in full HD. But that camera does cost about $100 more, which in my opinion is very worth it. And lastly, the design, because a point and shoot may not be right for everybody. The camera's small and compact and saves a ton of space, but the actual build quality is amazing. This thing will last you forever. And I'm not just saying that because I actually own one. I've had this camera since 2018, maybe 2017, and honestly, all the buttons still work. The screen hasn't broken off. Like, this thing has not been treated well, but it's still taking. Honestly, I should have been holding this camera this entire video. The screen on the back also flips up so that you can see yourself while filming, but it's also a touchscreen, which allows you to touch focus, but also operate the camera very quickly. And the battery life on this camera is still pretty decent. I thought it'd be kind of terrible after it's been around for so long, but honestly, it holds up. But like everything, it's not a perfect camera, and it does have one teeny weeny flaw that might make it a deal breaker for a lot of you. And that is the fact that it does not have an input for an external mic. Now, the internal audio in this camera is super solid. Let's play the clip. So we're just testing out the audio to see how it sounds in a very, very busy street. I've already done a test already, and I can say the audio sounds surprisingly solid. As you can see from Baby Me, it's super solid, but if you're not close to the camera, it's gonna have a hard time hearing you and the audio is not going to be great. For that reason, a lot of you guys might want an external or wireless audio input. For that reason, I do recommend upgrading to the G7X Mark III, which has that much needed audio input. Overall, these are great beginner cameras that come at a relatively affordable price point. But one thing that I quickly want to mention is that if you guys do want a compact camera, but you want a more premium experience, because after all, this is still a beginner entry-level camera, I do recommend looking into the Sony ZV-1. It's a really good camera, has 4K, and a really good lens, but best of all, it also has a Bluetooth grip that also doubles as a tripod, which makes it really convenient for content creators. I do recommend looking into it. I'm going to leave a link down below if you guys want to learn more about the camera. And I also have a full review of this camera on the channel. So a lot of you probably want something that looks more cinematic and is closer to a proper DSLR and mirrorless camera for the increase in quality. In that case, make sure to check out this next camera. The Canon M50 Mark I and Mark II are actually my most recommended vlogging cameras, and the surprising thing is they don't actually cost that much more. Switching to the M50, you will see a huge bump in quality. The main reason for that is the much larger sensor, plus you get interchangeable lenses. Now you might be wondering, why is this my most recommended vlogging camera? And that is for three major reasons. First up is that 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor. That larger sensor is going to give you that shallow depth of field effect, and it's simply going to make your vlogs look much more cinematic. And just like the G7X Mark II, this camera also does 24 and 30 for vlogging in full HD, Plus, it also has 60 frames per second in Full HD for slow motion montages. Sadly, it does not have a time-lapse mode. This camera does have 120 frames per second for super slow motion. Sadly, it's only in 720p, and in today's day and age, I simply say no to low resolution video. Now, this camera does have 4K, but I don't recommend using it. The 4K in this camera comes with a pretty significant image crop, plus a reduction in quality. And the zoomed in image is really not ideal for vlogging. But if you want a proper 4K vlogging camera, don't worry, I've got you covered. And the second reason that I often recommend this camera is actually the body design. This camera was designed for content creators. It's small and compact and super easy to vlog with, plus it has a side articulating screen, which is ideal. The side articulating screen is also a touchscreen for touch autofocus and camera operation. But best of all, it has an input for an external microphone. And speaking of autofocus, the autofocus in this camera is phenomenal, and actually my third reason. The M50 has Canon's dual pixel autofocus, which does a great job when it comes to face tracking and object tracking. It's extremely reliable and quick. Okay, but wait, there are two versions of this camera, the Mark I and the Mark II. They're basically the same camera, but the Mark II has 30% faster autofocus and has face tracking, but also eye tracking. So for someone that thinks they have a hard time with autofocus, I do recommend picking up the Mark II for an extra $80 to $100. But I have to say, most of us probably won't notice. Overall, the M50 is probably the camera that most of you guys are gonna pick up simply because it's got great image quality and it's a relatively affordable camera. And that brings us to the final camera on this list, the big boy of vlogging, which is the Sony ZV-E10. This is actually replacing my 2-year in a row best camera for vlogging, the Canon 90D. This camera is absolutely outstanding. The ZV-E10 was built from the ground up, specifically with vloggers and content creators in mind. And in fact, not only do I think this is the best vlogging camera out there, but it may just be the best budget camera out there. Now, this has basically the same internals as the Sony a6400, a 24 megapixel sensor, Full HD up to 120 frames per second, and 4K in 24 and 30. But they made 5 major changes to this camera that make it a top-notch vlogging camera. First of all, the design. This camera now officially has a side articulating screen. There's only 2 Sony cameras that do this, and this is a very, very welcome addition. On top of the side articulating screen, another thing that I love is that the headphone jack no longer hits the side screen as you're turning it, which is something that I loved about the Canon 90D. But one thing that I absolutely love about this camera is that they've completely overhauled the placement of the buttons and dials on this camera. For example, the record button is no longer on the side and hard to hit, it's now prominent and now at the top of the camera. And on top of that, they've gotten rid of the mode dial, which a vlogger really doesn't need. Instead, they've replaced it with one simple button that lets you switch between photo, video, and slow and quick mode with a simple press. But there is a downside. It still uses the old Sony batteries, which really don't last that long. Sadly, battery life is an issue with this camera. And the second thing that I think vloggers will absolutely love is the updated audio system in this camera. Now, this camera has amazing, and I mean absolutely amazing internal audio. It does have an input for external audio, but this audio is honestly as good as a shotgun mic built right into this camera. You can almost think of it as getting a free microphone with this camera. And the best part is it keeps your camera small. And earlier I said that a lot of you guys probably want a camera that makes things look very cinematic. A great thing about this camera is that Sony has built in professional color profiles so that you can really color grade your image out of this and make it look super cinematic and look like the best vloggers out there. This camera has HLG3, S-Log3, and Cinema 1 through 4, which is exactly the kind of color profiles I expect to find in a professional camera. And speaking of cinematic, this camera has the coolest feature in it, which is actually a digital bokeh. Now, it's really subtle, but once you see it, you really cannot go back, and I think it adds a ton to your camera's image. You see the same effects in smartphones, but they're not really done super well. This camera does make it look very, very good. And you can turn it on and off with a simple press of the button at the very top. And the last reason that I think vloggers and basically anybody will love this camera is the autofocusing system. Sony autofocus is literally light years ahead of the rest of the industry. This camera now has the same autofocusing system, but also a new addition, which is known as touch tracking. You can simply tap an object and it will track your subject within your frame. Even if you go off frame and come back to it, it will remember that subject and track back to it. Overall, if you're somebody that wants to make really great videos or simply wants to take your current videos to the next level, I highly recommend picking this up. But if you want to take this camera or really any camera and get the best possible results from it, there's only one way to do that, and that is to properly learn how to use it. So if you're interested in learning how to make your videos go from looking like this to this, and your photos from looking like this to this, I put together a free training of 7 simple secrets that will dramatically improve your photos and videos today. These simple secrets include things like frame rates, lens choices, camera angles, and how to get the most out of the gear that you're using right now, even if that gear is a smartphone. I included a link in the description down below, so make sure to check that out. Make sure to check out the links in the description down below for the best and the most up-to-date pricing. So if you like this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to future content. And with that being said, those are my top 3 vlogging cameras. I will see you guys either in the free training or in the next video. Peace.